Hey, this is James Packard at the Western Welding Academy. Ran into a student while I was on the blue collar tour, Jasmine Montoya, big shout out. Had me help her fit up a 8-inch piece of pipe. Problem she was having was she wasn't getting a root in there quite right. When I looked at it, she didn't have the right land on there. She didn't have very much land at all actually, and that ends up cutting a big keyhole. So what we're gonna do today, we're gonna show you how to grind a land on a piece of pipe. Let's get after it. What Jasmine ended up having was a really sharp edge. There's this really sharp knife edge when you put a brand new bevel on there. And what you need to have is a flat surface on there for that weld to lay down on. If you try to weld on that knife edge running 60-10, it's gonna blow a big hole in it. I'm gonna do one that has a little bit of a land on there. We'll look at it, and then I'm gonna do one the way I like it. The way I like it, the bigger the land, the better. If you have an extra big land and you get your fit up right, you can always take a little bit of that land off. If your land is too small and you don't have the right fit up, you can't put any more land back on there and you're stuck with that bad fit. So first thing we gotta do is get our PPE on. Safety glasses, face shield, grinder with a guard, gloves, guantes. What ends up happening when you're new at welding, people tend to get the land right about the first 3 times. And then as they're tuning their eyeball in, that land starts getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I see it time and time again when a new welder starts out really good. They can slam a root in just like a professional, and then the more welds they do, the worse it gets. And usually it's because they don't cut enough land on there. So basically what I do is I'll get my grinder on edge like this and I'll drag that disc. I don't want to push because that'll dig a big hole. So let's drag that root or that land on there, drag that land on there, kind of rough it in this way, and then I'm going to get on there flat. So you can see right in here, see how that disc makes contact all the way across that surface there. When we get ready to finish it up, we'll do it that way so it makes it nice and flat. I'm gonna show you a 332 land. We just use a 332 70/18 to measure that. When you're new starting out, measure all of them. Figure out a way to measure your land so you get something consistent every time. So I'm gonna use a 332, we'll measure it, we'll get it set, and then we'll use an 1/8 inch. I'm gonna put an 1/8 inch land on there because that's where I like to stop, and sometimes even bigger than a 1/8. But we'll do a 332, we'll do a 1/8, and then maybe I'll go a little further and put a land on there that I like. So this is a rough end. Always keep you a file around. I know Tyler, he did a whole series on files, how it's the only tool you'll need to be a welder. When you do your land, there ends up being this burr on the inside. And I know we've gone over it in our other videos on plate. I don't know if you can see it, but I can sure feel it on there. There's one right there. See how that burr is starting to come out right there? You gotta pull that burr out because it makes that land look bigger than it really is. So look at the size now, and then I pull that burr out with my file, and you can see it got quite a bit smaller, probably about half the size. So that's about what Jasmine had on hers. Hers may be a little bit smaller yet, probably something like that. I'm sure people are thinking that's about a 332. When you go to measure these, don't put your rod on there on the side like that, because it looks like 332 no matter which way you go. Always stick it on the end, that flat side, put it on the end of that right there. It's slightly smaller than a 332. So that land there is still too small for my taste. My minimum is 332, okay? So we're gonna put a 332 on there. It's gonna look bigger than 332, but it'll measure out right. Now that's gonna be real close to 332 right there. Looks like an 1/8 inch, but it's a 332. Try to keep that flat all the way across there. What I'm looking for is little waves and dips in that. You want it to be as flat as possible. It turned out pretty good. Now, if I had a 7-inch disc, I could just stick it on there plumb flat. So that's a 332, a 3/32 land. I like to go with the 1/8. So I'm gonna grind that down a little bit more and see how it turns out. That's right at an 1/8 inch there. But it's personal preference. Some guys take a little bitty land and a really tight gap. I run 1/8 inch plus, maybe 1/8 inch, a little bigger, and a 1/16 gap. It's been worked out for me for about 20 years, so I just stick to it. Some people like 332, 332. There's a whole bunch of combinations on it. So that's the rough end. And what I do next is I take my trusty old file here and I set it on here like this. And as long as I'm making contact in 2 places, it should be good and flat. And I just give it a little bit of a finish polish on there. And that'll sort out any of the high spots and low spots. There we go. And that, my friends, that's a land I like to have when I'm getting ready to weld. Next time you're having a struggle on your route, check your land, because I bet that's a good place to start. Shout out to Jasmine Montoya.